Okay, so at time of writing, someone in my private Discord brought up the topic of Tharja this morning, and this person doesn't play Fire Emblem or even really know anything about Tharja in general, but had some questions about her, and the conversation actually got me stuck on a question enough that I kind of need to work out my thoughts on it. So that's where this video comes in, and the question is thus: is Tharja a bad character? Tharja is one of those characters that people tend to either love or hate, and that's largely due to, well, just the kind of character she is. And full disclosure, I don't like her very much because, well, for that very reason. See, Tharja is one of the bigger examples of a fan service character in the series, being one of the characters Insys tends to cart out with a new sexy design over and over, and on top of that she's a fucking yandere. Tharja's main defining character trait is her, and let's be honest here, fucking creepy obsession with Robin, and by extension the player, which means she's built to appeal to a very specific kind of player right off the bat. And speaking as someone who's dealt with people like that in real life, characters like this make me uncomfortable. Having been subject to stalking and exceptionally possessive behaviour in the past, I can promise you it's not as fun as some people like to imagine. And I say all of this to give context to the fact that, while I don't like her, I do not think Tharja is a bad character, which I know might confuse people, but what you have to understand is, when it comes to critical analysis, it's very important to learn the difference between I don't like this and this is objectively bad. And I just do not think Tharja is a bad character. A bad person though, that's an entirely different conversation and one I'd like to discuss in this video, because the answer to that question is a lot more complicated and open to interpretation. Allow me to explain my reasoning on the title question first, and then I'll get into the second. As I said, Tharja is very obviously a fan service character, one that's laser focused on the player character and very flirty with you in her own Tharja way. And the problem with writing characters like her is that, even if you're trying to deconstruct the archetype or something like that, a lot of people simply won't give you the grace period you need to pull it off. Deconstruction comes in two base parts: the build up and the twist. You need to establish the character as being the thing you want to deconstruct in your writing for long enough to allow the audience to mentally place them in that category before you can subvert their expectations. And when it comes to characters like Tharja, some people will just not give you that time. This is something I went into on my video on the male gaze, but people are kind of used to creators just making excuses to justify putting fan servicey, male gaze pandering characters into their work. Because often no amount of Watsonian explanations can override the Doyleist explanation that you just want to put a lady in a skimpy outfit and have her make doomy eyes at the player. And so there's a good amount of people who will see characters like Tharja, whose very first interaction with the player after being recruited is admitting to being obsessed with and stalking you, and then write her off as not worth dealing with. And even when they know there's more to the character than that, they still might not find it worth it to try to push through the squick factor to get to the more that there is. And the thing is, I do think there is a level of deconstruction being attempted with Tharja. Insys has tried similar things with fan service or flirty / over-sexual characters since, but I think the only one they've fully managed to pull it off with is Dorothea, who I might cover in another video, who the fuck knows. But Tharja is at least a bit of a twist on the obsessed yandere archetype, because she's actually capable of falling in love with other people, and she does show care for other people as well. She never loses her fucking obsession with Robin and often tells her prospective husband that he will be second to them in her heart, but she does at least show more depth than your typical Gosei clone. This finally brings us to the question of whether or not she's a bad person, which is where things get more open to interpretation. Tharja is a dark mage of Plegia, and outside of her frankly quite off-putting obsession with Robin, dark magic is her entire life. She's dedicated herself to the mastery of curses and hexes, and as such is constantly working on improving, which means casting them. A lot, often on her comrades, and she's also kind of an antisocial bitch. The vast majority of Tharja's support conversations start out with her either hexing someone, threatening to hex someone, or just generally insulting them or making demands. Demands that usually involve them giving her something to facilitate future hexes. But, I mean, Tharja isn't an unsympathetic person either. When she does hex someone, it's usually something minor like a runny nose, and it's made clear in her B support with Frederick that sometimes she just uses the threat of being a dangerous mage who could curse someone as a way to keep people at arm's length, since she claims to have hexed him with the cold he has, which is a lie. But I think the most damning evidence to her not being as nasty as she likes to pretend is in her support with Noe, where she desperately tries to avoid having to tell the Maneki that her parents are already dead, and even works to make her feel better after the fact. I personally think that this game pulls the "just kidding, this character isn't as bad as you thought" gambit with too many characters, and just doesn't put in the necessary effort to make it work. Gangrel and Aversa definitely come to mind as examples, but I do think that Tharja is generally given the proper time and writing to pull it off and make her a more likable character for most people. I mean, she is one of the most popular female units in the history of the series, and that obviously isn't all just from horny people. So I do think there's enough done to counterbalance Tharja's flaws to make people generally consider her a good character or at least very likable. Except perhaps with Noir. Yeah, this is where we get into the single biggest problem with Tharja, and that would be her treatment of her daughter. Tharja, in both the present and the future, uses Noir as a guinea pig for her new spells, something Noir clearly finds upsetting, and there's never any indication that this really stops. According to Noir's support, with whoever her father ends up being, he would frequently try to get Tharja to stop and get hexed for his troubles, and the regularity of this occurrence is part of what convinces Noir that the future can't be changed, because if even something as simple as getting her mother to stop cursing her can't be done, how can she expect to avert something as big as the apocalypse? This tends to be the point that a lot of people get caught up on with Tharja, and indeed is what my Discord member mentioned that their friend said. This is Tharja abusing Noir and she's evil for it. And here's the thing, they're not entirely wrong. Tharja's continual cursing of her daughter, especially while knowing that it distresses her, is absolutely a form of abuse. This is straight up abusive treatment, no matter how minor the effects might be. Alright, so then it's an open and shut case, yeah? Tharja's an evil bitch and that's that? Well, no, not entirely. It is a little more complicated than that, because there is something else to consider, and no, I'm not talking about the times Tharja works to protect her daughter and show her love in other ways, because no matter how loving you are, abuse is still abuse. No, I think it's actually a matter of differences in cultural upbringing. This does require a little bit of reading between the lines, but I think this behaviour stems from how Tharja was raised, and not necessarily from malice or a lack of empathy. See, Tharja was born in Plegia, a desert country largely dominated by the Grimleal, a cult so evil and dangerous that the entire reason Walhart was trying to conquer Elise at all was to build up enough military might to waltz up to Valadar and shove his size 19 boot right down the man's throat to avert the end of days. It's not a nice place, nor does it tend to foster nice people. And Tharja grew up in a very curse-centered family, where I think a lot of this was just normal. It's made very clear through her support conversations that Tharja doesn't exactly have a good sense of other people's normal, to the point that her entire B support with Robin is her acting as what she thinks they think normal is. But keep in mind, outside of Henry, who is nuttier than a squirrel in a jar of peanut butter for unrelated reasons, she's the only Plegian in the army outside of the Paralogs, and also the only Dark Mage, so she's our only real example of what a normal Plegian Dark Mage might look like. And in her supports with Noir, she reveals that curses are such an intrinsic part of her that even her umbilical cord was cut with a curse, and she still sends and receives letters from her family. She was literally cursed as a newborn, and she's still on good enough terms with her family to keep in communication during war. And all this leads me to believe that this habit of cursing her own family members comes from her family life. To her, this isn't abuse, this is just what Dark Mages do. And I need to make myself clear here, absolutely none of this is meant to be taken as an excuse for her actions, nor to imply that she should or should not be forgiven. It's really not my place to decide how forgivable her actions are, that's on Noir. But I did feel it necessary to lay out all of this for the purpose of understanding Tharja a little better. So, is Tharja a bad character? No. I don't like her very much, but she's well enough written and consistent and is at the very least interesting to talk about. But is she a bad person? That's harder to say because as much as her stalker nature weirds me the fuck out and as antisocial as she is, she ultimately maintains a track record of helping more often than not. And her morality, while a little weird, does ultimately lead her to side with the good guys. But I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you like Tharja? Do you think she's ultimately a bad person? I eagerly await your input. This video was unplanned and entirely spur of the moment, but I might do something like this again for other characters if people enjoyed it. This was fun. Either way, I've been writing real slow and thanks for watching.